Welcome to Breaking Sales, a podcast dedicated to helping you have tough, meaningful, and rewarding conversations with your prospects and clients. In meaningful, what we mean is these are the conversations you truly feel like you are the prospect or client's conversational peer. There's no anxiousness or uncertainty holding you back. You feel a sense of calm and confidence in asking the tough questions. You're not thrown off by the bad news, and you expect the prospect to think about and invest into the conversation as much as you do. On Breaking Sales, we use the filter of psychology and innate human behavior to deconstruct the many misleading sales approaches that actually work against your efforts to build trust and close the business. Let's get started. Can you really call yourself a high performer if you have no idea how healthy your business is? Think about it. You're in the flow, you're doing well, but are you tracking anything to be consistent? If that question stings a little, it's time to admit that you can't improve what you don't measure, and it's so true. Now I know what you're thinking. Tracking your sales pipeline metrics feels like homework. It's time-consuming, tedious. Maybe even a little beneath someone who's naturally good at sales and in a groove. I understand. But the truth most sales professionals don't want to admit to is that being busy with sales activities and being a high performer are two completely different things. You can put tremendous effort into your pipeline and business development, but without tracking key metrics that confirm your efforts or producing the results that you want, you're essentially flying blind. In this episode, Pam and I will confront the uncomfortable reality of tracking and its connection to high performance. We'll explore why so many sales professionals resist tracking their metrics, how success can come down to luck and timing when you're not measuring what matters, and the specific metrics that separate high performers from everyone else. If you've got white space on your calendar and you're wondering why your pipeline feels inconsistent, this episode will help you out. Pam, I know what you want to talk about today, but I'm going to do the formality and I'm going to ask you, Pamela, what would you like to discuss with our audience today?
I want to talk about tracking today and the significance tracking has on your mindset regarding high performance.
I like right away how you just connected the two, tracking and mindset, because right, tracking, it's like ho-hum, all right, tracking, okay, first meeting, second meeting, third meetings. But when you put mindset in there, I'm like, oh, all right, that sounds interesting.
Yep. So this is probably a podcast geared towards our sales professionals out there. I am any business development, absolutely, any business development responsibilities. I understand how time-consuming and cumbersome tracking can be. But I also don't understand how you can claim to be a high performer if you have no idea how strong and healthy your business is because you're not tracking. And Dan, I understand everybody's industry is a little different. But it just seems like more and more and more, I'm hearing this excuse when I'll ask the question of, okay, so tell me how many meetings you've had. Tell me about your pipeline. Pam, I don't track that. This is what I look at. This is all I need to know. And I just sit back and ask myself, okay, you can't claim to be a high performer. Remember, high performers continue to reach their potential. That's the whole deal. I'm going to continue to reach my potential. How do you do that if you have no idea how healthy your business actually is? How do you know that? And so my whole thing is you've got to take a step back and understand all your efforts. And I know, Dan, people put a lot of effort into their pipelines and their business, but without confirming that their efforts are actually producing consistency and sustainability, you can't tell me you have any clarity on how healthy that is and whether or not you're truly developing as a high performer without key metrics being tracked. And Dan, you know, I'm married to an ex-PGA player. Jeff thinks it's absurd that somebody wouldn't have a set of metrics that tells them, am I hitting my potential? Am I developing consistency? Am I developing a level of sustainability and a skill without tracking? And if I even showed you what my husband tracks, it would blow your mind. And no, sales professionals, business development folks, I'm not asking you to develop a spreadsheet with 19 tabs, but I am asking you to get more clarity on what are the key indicators, the metrics that tell me I'm doing all right. I'm making progress.
What I pulled from that so far, because I know Jeff, and Jeff has been kind enough to give me lessons. He is methodical, and that is why he was so good. He was methodical. He controlled what he could control, and he's just very deliberate. And you can learn so much from that. You're right about, hey, as a business development person, maybe I'm not gregarious. Maybe I'm not an extrovert. I don't have good feel. When it comes to sales and conversation rhythm, I'm all thumbs. But you can become a high performer and a high achiever by just putting in the discipline and, like you said, tracking consistently what needs to be tracked, because nobody's born a high performer.
No. Agreed. And how in the heck do you know your level of success isn't coming down to luck and timing? And I understand, as a former sales professional, okay, I absolutely would tell you there were years where it came down to luck and timing. But I want that to be the exception, not the rule. I want to say that I had the level of success that I had because of my ability to gain clarity on knowing where my success is coming from.
You know, Pam, I know we're talking about tracking, but I want to share this with our listeners because what you said is so, so true. Back in I'm going to date myself here, back in 1997 or 98, 99, I did really, really, really well in sales. I did. I made more money than I ever thought I could in my late 20s. I think I was always in the top 5%, right? All that, felt really good about myself. But it wasn't too long after that, I looked back and I thought, was that really me? Or was that the industry and the timing? And you know what, Pam? I think to this day, so much of that success, absolutely, 70, 75% was industry and timing. So I think it's okay that we recognize that. And I think it's healthy as professionals when we recognize that success we had for that moment in time, whether it lasted 6 months or 2 or 3 years, what were the contributors to that success? And I think I think it's healthy to be honest with ourselves about that. I'm really glad you brought that up.
My lesson in this is because exactly what you said. I was working in a sales role and I was bragging about myself quite a bit. I was young and I was having an extreme level of success. So much so that my boss came out and said, "My goodness, Pam, you're just lighting it on fire." And he's doing it in a very sarcastic way because I had lost all humility. And he said, "Because you are so darn good, we're going to put you in our least performing neighborhood. So we're going to take you out of this one," which, by the way, to your point, Dan, was brand new in a great location, new floor plans, the whole 9 yards. And they put me in the least performing neighborhood. And what do you think happened? I had a massive come to Jesus, to the point where my job was almost at stake, because we had a rule that if you went a certain amount of time without sales, it was just a non-negotiable that you weren't going to have a job. And it's Randy McNutt. And Randy McNutt was my mentor and my boss at the time. And he's like, this had nothing to do with you. And so now you're going to start learning how to work on you and how you really know whether or not you're developing a level of consistency in selling. And it was the best lesson. Almost lost my job, but was the best lesson. I went from shooting fish in a barrel to going 2 months without a single sale. And it was the best lesson on, it had nothing to do with me. And the environment that I was put in afforded me this level of success.
I love that story. And I do have a feeling that many of those who listen can probably empathize and sympathize and think back on their own experiences and think, you know what? There's probably some truth in that for a lot of folks. Like I said, I'm one of them, 100%. You have to be objective about what contributes to your success. It doesn't mean you can't take credit for some of it. But I think you really got to take a step back and just try to be honest with yourself about, okay, what are the factors here that led to all of this?
And you want to be able to have a set of statistics over time that allows you to see how to increase the health of your business and your pipeline. You know, Dan, you and I see sales professionals that do this all the time, and they want to blame all these external factors, which I completely agree. Some of them are external, but some of them are your lack of tracking that tells you what pieces of your business are not in good health and need focus and attention. Because remember, sales professional and business development folks, our job is to maintain a level of consistency over time and sustainability so that we're not riding this pipeline that goes up and down. And how do you do that without a set of metrics that you can consistently reflect on to tell you the things that you're not going to be able to see day in and day out in your business?
Right. And I'll add this before you get into them. For our listeners, I know this. Some of you, as you listen right now, if you were to flip open your Outlook or your current calendar, the more white space that you see, that would more than likely mean this is a podcast or an episode you truly need to listen to. Because the more white space people have on their calendar does correlate to the quality and consistency of what they're tracking. Usually the white space means they don't like to feel like they're tied to a particular action. It doesn't mean they're not hard workers. It doesn't mean that they're not going to have grit. None of that. But they don't like the idea of their calendar dictating to them where they spend their time and their effort. Yet that's exactly what they need, is they need more in their calendar dictating it. Because the white space isn't freedom. It's how you use the white space that creates freedom. And part of that is what you're going to talk about is, what are you tracking?
So Dan, maybe I'll let you start on this one. If you think about somebody who's in a business development role, what have you seen as these are the key metrics that are going to start to tell me how I continue to get healthier and healthier and healthier as a business professional?
If you're in business development, everything starts with, and we all know this, is the quantity and the quality of the conversations that you're having. Everything. All right. I'm not going to say it's a numbers game, though, because it's not. You and I did that research with one of our clients 6-7 years ago, right? And we proved it's not a numbers game if you work hard on the quality of your conversations. But that aside, you have to start, as you know, and you do this day in, day out with a lot of our clients, Pam, you got to start off with, okay, Who are you getting out to see? What is your effort? What is your commitment to finding and going out and putting yourself out there to connect with those who might need your help and having those first conversations?
And there's good first conversations and there's quality first conversations. You can get them.
If you just listen to our past podcast, you know there is the easy no versus the hard no. And that all goes into, like you just said, good first conversations versus lazy or bad first conversations.
That's why I love tracking certain metrics. Over time, you see a pattern develop. With every individual, you can start to tell, here's where my strengths are. Here's where my weaknesses are. Just the statistics tell a fantastic story. You can have a plethora of first conversations, but then the beginning phases of your pipeline are like lean for months at a time. So then you look back, okay, well then, what is this telling me about my first meetings? Because boy, I'm getting them. How am I using them? Because I don't have a lot of people that want to continue conversations with me. And my guess is, based on the number of first meetings that I had, I probably should. So what's going on there? Like, it's amazing how you can identify trends in your skill set and your effort if you track certain metrics over time.
So what would you suggest our listeners do when it comes to setting up tracking or process for first meetings based on all of the high performers that you've coached over the past 10 years?
So I think it comes down to your point, the two components of the quality of my outreach and the number of meetings that I'm setting. And I've got to have a way that I am measuring both of those things. And folks, I get it. It's cumbersome and it's time. But I think you have to ask yourself, what's my alternative? Not know. So the quality of the outreach, how much of it am I doing? What channels am I creating to get those first conversations? And am I appropriately tracking the return on those investments? We all know there's a quality associated with how I set some of these first conversations. There's a quality component to that and my outreach component to that. Are you reflecting on that? Are you evolving your outreach? Those types of things is what you and I, Dan, have always tracked when it comes to new business development. We look at the quality and the quantity, and you've got to have a way to do that.
Yeah, it makes me reflect on a meeting I had with a client recently. Literally, we did a little halfway through the year state of the business, which, by the way, is healthy. Everybody should be doing those. And I asked everybody to go back and look at how many first appointments have you had since January 1st, and what was the source? It was very interesting, actually, for the client, because I think they were surprised in some ways, in a very good way, where they had good balance in a multitude of business development buckets. So this particular individual had X amount from cold call. Kudos. Had a very similar amount from networking, and then had another similar amount from family friends. And I thought it was very interesting because it was a nice balance that this individual had produced. And I think for them, they understood, right? They have 3 good buckets right now, or avenues and paths in their business development, and they're working each bucket. And I think that's also important, like you said, is to understand, where are you generating and how are you generating these first appointments? Because you really do need to work multiple buckets. And I know you've always talked about this, Pam. You have to work multiple paths, multiple buckets, multiple sources all the time. It can't just be one, only one. Because then you got one. What would they call that? Then you got one.
Like a one-trick pony. I'm only successful this way. So then, obviously, then you go to aspects of your pipeline. And this is where I know based on the industry, but you've got to start tracking, okay, how many folks am I in conversation with about my product or service? How many of those conversations am I having at any given time during the year? And you know, Dan, you and I find that there's a healthy range of, okay, now I'm talking to X amount of people about our product and service. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to buy said product or service, but we're in conversation about it. I call it active conversations. We're talking about the possibility that this might be a good decision for you. I think this one is key too, because it also helps you figure out, as we all know, sometimes when we have those first conversations, it's not necessarily, the timing isn't appropriate for the prospect. Hey, this has been great and I learned a ton, but we're not in a position to prioritize something like this. There's not a need. Okay. And you know, Dan, we teach a methodology that plays a longer game. I'm going to stay visible to that prospect so that if and when there does become a need, I've stayed present in a little bit more of a meaningful way than calling them every now and again to see if they're ready to chat. So that actives is a good indicator of, am I finding the folks through my channels that are ready now to talk about my product and service? But I've also done a great job of being consistent in staying visible, that I have people coming back around. So I also like to look at, all right, how many people are talking to us about our product and service? And when was our initial conversation with them? That tells you a lot about the health of your business. If I have active conversations that are rooted in people that I dealt with in the past that are now ready, and people that are ready now, that's a great, healthy mix. So I think that's a really viable statistic to look at, is how many active conversations am I participating in now with prospects?
And you have to remember, listeners, for active, you got to be objective. Active means that if you email them, they will email you back. If you call them, they will call you back. Active means that it is both ways.
We're talking about the possibilities of my product or service. Not a done deal yet, but we're talking about it.
That's the part where everybody has to be honest with themselves, because if you start being subjective and you start to tell yourself some kinds of stories, you're gonna get a false sense of security from active conversations. This is where you got to stay objective to yourself and say, you know what, I may be talking to 10 different prospects, but if I'm going to be honest, maybe only 3 or 4 of them are truly active. I need to see if I can encourage, or if there's a need for the other 5 to 6 to become active. So again, you got to be honest with yourself. That's a key to high performance.
And I find in that bucket, there's a lot of ambiguity in how we're defining an active conversation, for sure. And then the last significant metric, I think, is some version of, okay, short term. Now, these folks really debated the change. And I helped them come to the conclusion that this is a change they needed to debate. So the actives could be anywhere even early in the process, but now that short-term pipe, they actually worked a process, whether formal or informal, to debate this change. And it's interesting to see that too, like how many of our active conversations actually do truly work a process to debate, do I do this or not? Because Dan, as you and I know, sometimes in a second or a third conversation with a prospect, we help them determine this isn't the right time. So they don't go the distance on debating that change. So there's a clear delineation between an active and short-term pipe, because not all our active conversations with prospects end up working a process to debate the change. The stakeholders involved, this is a priority. We have decided this is something we want to debate, and we're potentially talking to others about it too. Not everybody gets to that stage. So I think it's also interesting to have that separation between the folks that we're talking to about our product or service and the ones that actually see through a process to determine if they need to do this. And that's, Dan, where I see the biggest skill set in helping folks actually think through the merits of change. That's when, when we talk about the pros and the cons, talking through the hurdles, you can see the sales professionals that really do that well, and they have a good, healthy balance of their active conversations. Actually, this is a change we need to debate. We are going to see this through, bring in other stakeholders, prioritize this for the organization, because you've helped us determine that this is something we should be debating and seeing through.
Ironically, and you and I talked about this in 2 of our previous episodes regarding closing, which I really enjoyed those discussions with you. But if you remember, we talked about this, what I'm going to mention in those closing episodes from maybe a month ago or so, and that is patience. Drive the conversation and be deliberate, absolutely, through your questions, your listening, your curiosity, right? But you got to be patient. That's the key thing to what you're saying, and that is so true. The best of the best, I've always noticed, they are okay and willing to be patient. Patient doesn't mean laissez-faire. Patient doesn't mean irreverent. Patient doesn't mean they're not going to ask for the business. Absolutely not. What patient means is they understand this is a thinking process. It's a debate process for the prospect. And so they understand they can shepherd the conversation, but they have to be patient with the conversation.
So sales professionals, business development folks, these are just examples of the stats Dan and I deem to be really telling on whether or not your business is healthy, sustainable, and consistent. But our ask is do the hard work to determine what those stats metrics are for you and be disciplined about tracking those so that you aren't subject to the ups and downs, luck and timing. And it's more about your ability to continue to develop yourself so you can maintain a healthy pipeline at any given time throughout your career.
Pam, I'm going to end on this. You made me think about that. So I'm in a workshop a couple weeks ago with a bunch of well-established, more senior sales professionals. We were talking about stuff like this, and we were talking about mindset, right? The difference between the attachment and the detachment and all that. And this gentleman said, and he was so spot on, he says, I get this. He goes, and I realize the reality. I can be successful because I have been, and I could continue to be so with some attachment, some scarcity, and some low intent, and maybe not as methodical in my tracking and processes as we're talking about here. He goes, but the problem with that, and this is what he said, he goes, and I recognize it, is it creates anxiety. It's not fun. And I thought his comment was brilliant because he's right. He had been successful. He can be successful. But that path causes, right, a lot of anxiety and anxiousness and annoyance and agitation, frustration and stress, versus take the same energy and the same talent and shift, right? Shift the mindset, number one, and then shift the discipline around what you're tracking and being honest about it.
Good summary, Dan.
As we wrap up, I want you to think about this. How do you know your level of success isn't coming down to luck and timing? You heard the story that I shared. Sometimes we have to be very objective about our success so that we give ourselves the chance to bring out the best in ourselves down the road. Remember, you can't claim to be a high performer if you have no idea how strong and healthy your business is. The numbers don't lie. The path to high performance isn't about working harder. It's about working with clarity. When you track the right metrics over time, you start to see patterns that reveal your strengths and your weaknesses. You'll know when your first meetings aren't converting to active conversations, or when your active conversations aren't progressing any further. Start with the basics: quality and quantity of first conversations, active pipeline discussions where prospects actually engage back, and short-term prospects who are genuinely debating the possibility of making a change. Choose 1 or 2 tracking disciplines to focus on over the next 90 days. Make these new actions a constant habit. And remember, high performers don't leave their success to chance. They know exactly where their business stands at any given time, and they know where the gaps are that they need to fill. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Until next time.